It was a wild ride today in Munich. We heard a lot of things from Kellogg and the Trump side, a lot from the Ukrainian side, and it was almost too much news in one day. And so I figured it's really easy to break down everything in just a little video here. I probably won't hit every single main point because there was a lot. So bear with me right now as we discuss what happened in Munich today, because we heard Kellogg say that Europe is not going to be involved in this. We heard rumors that the United States getting ready to meet with either Putin or his team in Saudi Arabia. And then we started reading a lot about, well, that deal the United States tried to give to Ukraine to sign and what was inside, which was totally unfair. So let's back up for a second. Zelensky gave a speech during the Munich conference, which he spoke for a little bit, and then they had a conversation back and forth. Probably one of the headlines you probably saw was this video right here.
I told Trump that Putin afraid of him. Yes, and he heard me. And now Putin knows.
In which Zelensky is not wrong. Right now, Putin is scared of Trump, which is why he's been playing to his words, which is why if Donald Trump does come up with a plan and presents it to Putin, he's automatically going to go ahead and be okay with it. We've been seeing how Putin's words have changed as, really talks about Donald Trump, which is very different than any other world leader, which does indicate in a way that yes, Putin is scared of Donald Trump or the U.S. military as a whole, which does prove the point that if the United States were a part of security guarantees, which at this very moment doesn't seem like it yet, then Putin would not move forward and would be forced to move back. This brings up the conversations of that security guarantee and minerals or rare minerals that the United States started drafting together to give to Ukraine, because it was only a few days ago that the U.S. Treasury Secretary made its way out to Ukraine with a document. Now, that document at the time, we didn't know what it said. Donald Trump said something about $300 billion worth of rare minerals are needed from Ukraine so they can fulfill different things and then get security guarantees and blah, blah, blah. And then we started getting different reports out. Some reports from Politico, some over here from NBC News, which said that in that report, the United States wanted 50% of Ukraine's rare minerals for free and with nothing. That would have just been a repayment back for all the stuff the United States had sent to Ukraine. Now, that agreement clearly is not something that Ukraine would be interested in. Zelensky said from day one that it would be a partnership, something that would benefit the United States and something that would benefit Ukraine. Why would Ukraine give up that much of their rare minerals like that if they got nothing in return? And you could argue, well, the United States had given, as Trump says, $300 billion, but that's not true. The United States Congress had only approved $170 billion, and only about $75 billion of that in the form of weapons, not physical money, went to Ukraine. So why would Ukraine give up so much for so little? That's not negotiation at all. It was almost like kind of a demand. So we know that Ukraine and Zelensky did reject it. They did say that doesn't work for us, and it probably shouldn't work for you either, because you're just taking advantage of the situation. As Ukraine has pointed out many times before, a lot of these rare minerals are located in Donetsk and Luhansk, which means that if the United States wants it, we have to find a way to clear out that entire area. And now, the U.S., some of the representatives have said that Ukraine can't return back to its 2014 borders, which doesn't really make sense when it comes to this, because how do you expect to get those rare minerals out? How would that work? That would not be fair to Ukraine at all. And so during all of these conversations, yes, we know that Ukraine wasn't ready to sign this. They're still working on details. Supposedly Ukraine went back with a better offer and the United States turned around and said, oh, what? They don't like what Ukraine had offered back, which was a partnership. That's the way it worked, because the alternative would have been Russia gets it, and Russia sends it to China or North Korea. And what's worse, Russia using it and selling it, or Russia then just parading it around that they're using it? Because at that point, the United States would be just giving it to Russia, which is like, what? You're just allowing Russia to take all this stuff when you guys need it in your own country. And remember, it comes at a time where places in Africa already are now withholding these kind of minerals that the United States needs so badly. So there's negotiations that could be had. Ukraine knows that the United States wants these things, and now they need those things, and Ukraine needs security guarantees for now and for the future. So during these talks here, I actually didn't talk that much about it. That was actually a lot of background information. But Zelensky does say a lot of important things. One is Europe should be creating their own military in which it only worries about Europe. And that's because of the comments that Donald Trump made the other day in which he said the United States is an ocean away from everything going on and that Europe should be taking care of everything. Those kind of comments scare European leaders. But things really got even more worse when you saw Kellogg today say that no one in Europe is going to be involved in the peace talks. That is something that he said during like a sit-down kind of conversation. People ask questions, and Kellogg said that in the Minsk II deal, there were too many cooks in the kitchen, which is why things fell apart. Now, I don't agree with that. I mean, really, you did have Germany and France kind of participating with that. The reason why things fell apart was just because we didn't support Ukraine enough. And when 2014 came and Ukrainians had the revolution and decided that we don't want anything to do with Russia and Russia's trying to get in here, the United States should have stepped up. Thanks in part mostly because of the partnership we had. And Russia saw an opportunity saying, look, this country over here of Ukraine is not doing well, so let's take a little bit of land and see what happens. That's how we got to that. Not because there was too many cooks in the kitchen. If anything, there wasn't enough assistance to Ukraine so that Russia wouldn't do this. And so Kellogg said there was a lot of people at the table, but it didn't work out. And that's why Europe will not be involved in negotiations, but its interests will be taken into account. He also stressed that this war could be over in 180 days, which is, I know, it's a weird thing where the United States keeps on moving that finish line. 24 hours, 100 days, 6 months, 180 days, like it keeps being pushed back and back. The one thing we can be certain on is that sanctions are working because Russia's not doing well. India's not buying oil. The price of Russian oil is going to go up more if we put tariffs and things on top of it. Ukraine is going after oil refineries deep inside of Russia, taking down depots, taking down just places where they're actually making this stuff. And if we keep doing that, that's going to cause Russia to come begging to come back to the negotiation table, which is probably the only good thing that Kellogg said during that whole thing, which is that they're getting ready to put more heavy sanctions on the Russian shadow fleet. If you don't know what that is, those are ships loaded with oil, Russian oil, that's going around trying to get around those sanctions, and Russia's making a lot of money. About 70% of the money that Russia gets to buy weapons and things come from oil. So if we're able to jointly, as an entire country, entire world, come together and say, okay, Ukraine, you guys go after oil and you go after refineries. All the other countries, more sanctions, more tariffs. India and other partners, you guys should stop buying Russian. And realistically, in 6 to 9 months, Russia will be begging for negotiations. Now, Zelensky does say that Putin is weak right now, and that is true. They never expected for this war to go as long as possible. When Russia was planning for this war, they did plan with a lot of reserves in place so they can fund certain things. But they never expected to, A, lose as many men, B, lose as much equipment, and C, have this extend for such a long time in which they're not making as much money when it comes to their oil. And so we are seeing a lot of those cracks form. We know that Russian taxes and things are going to start going up to help fund Russia's war, Putin's war. And it is a time and point to where the United States with force could come in and demand things from Putin, which unfortunately from that first phone call that we heard from between Zelensky, which unfortunately between the phone calls that happened between Putin and Trump, it almost seemed like, Putin got everything they wanted. And that's where Pete Hegseth came out the other day and pretty much outlined all these things, which were just all up Russia's alley. And that was that, which is just like, wait a minute. So you're just giving them everything. This all brings us back to some of the things that Zelensky is now looking for in a peace plan, which we already knew. 2014 border is ideal for Ukraine. They want that. But Zelensky says here that Russia must withdraw to at least the pre-2022 front line. That is a deal breaker if they don't do it. Ukraine also needs security guarantees, but he wants them from the United States, not Europe. And he's not trying to be mean to Europe, but right now, Russia is scared. Putin is scared of the United States. So security guarantees from Europe doesn't have as much weight as it would from the United States. So those are two big things right there, which are kind of like non-starters when it comes to peace talks. If none of that happens, it kind of is what it is. And Europe is planning for Trump to say no to this stuff. We know that on Monday, France's Macron is going to have an emergency summit in which world leaders, we don't know which ones yet, are going to meet to talk about all of these things. I'm assuming that it's going to be people from, Germany, France, Poland, countries like that, and even Ukraine. That way they can discuss what a world in Europe would look like if the United States decides to pull out. Because right now, only talks are happening between Russia and the United States. And somehow Ukraine and Europe, who, under Donald Trump's most recent announcements, would be stuck pretty much dealing with everything. And even Europe knows they would fail. They would lose if Russia were to move forward. And Zelensky highlighted that because he said, you got Russia that's currently fighting. Ukraine has gotten all the experience when it comes to fighting on the front lines. And Russia's ally of North Korea, who you may have not thought as a real threat on the front lines, they're now fighting. They're now getting experience. They're now getting things ready to go so that if they were to invade other countries, they're now smarter than the European military. Zelensky says that Russia is getting ready to put together 10 new divisions at 150,000 people, some of which is actually larger than some countries' own military right now. This comes back to building a bigger and larger military in Europe to protect not only Ukraine, but themselves in case Russia does decide to move forward and attack these other countries. Something that Zelensky is warning. Other NATO generals, even ones in the past, are like, hey, this is a strong possibility that if we don't stop what's going on right now in Ukraine, it's going to be coming to us. It could be 3 years, could be 5 years. We know that Russia wants a ceasefire to happen so that they can regroup. There has to be a way to stop Russia from regrouping. Whether that is having some kind of tariff or sanction on Russia for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years. Maybe it is doing some other kind of punishment. But there needs to be a way in order to truly stop Russia from coming. Now, Zelensky does say that NATO membership should still be on the table. That is the largest threat and the cheapest threat that you could give to Russia. Now, I need you to remember, Russia is the aggressor here. They started this. They've killed all those people. They've ruined cities and generations of Ukrainians. They need to be punished. There needs to be a way for Russia to feel pain so that they know what they did was wrong and they don't do it again. That's going to be sanctions. That's going to be giving land back to Ukraine. That's giving that $300 billion in frozen assets back to Ukraine and not to Russia. That is putting different kind of security guarantees on Russia, whether they be NATO bases or that new European military in which they would have their own base inside of Ukraine. There's a lot of moving parts at this time. There's a lot that's still up in the air we don't know about. Then Zelensky spoke about some kind of talk that was going to be happening in Saudi Arabia, in which it did not involve Ukraine. He said of this that it's strange that there's a conversation between the United States and Russia using the lure of Ukrainian peace talks without Ukraine. And look, we see reports from Politico that are coming out saying that the Trump team is headed to Saudi Arabia for Ukraine-Russian peace talks. But Ukraine is not involved in this. And so Zelensky has said before that peace talks without Ukrainian or European involvement are not talks. They're nothing. There's something that needs to have us involved. If you're mentioning our name, we need to be involved. If you're saying that Europe's either got to pay for it or they have to send their own troops, then Europe needs to be involved. And we're also seeing that just came out that U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio, had a phone call with Russia's Lavrov, not involving Ukraine in any of these conversations. According to a statement that read out from Lavrov, it says both sides expressed a mutual willingness to engage on key international issues, including the situation in Ukraine. Which is like, you had a conversation with Russia about Ukraine, but didn't talk to Ukraine. And Ukrainian officials are angry by this for obvious reasons. Why are you negotiating for Ukraine without having some kind of plan together with Ukraine? And Zelensky said that. He says that the United States should be with Ukraine building a plan in which they together with Europe could present to Russia. Because these countries need to stand together. They need to look at Putin and say, we're here together, you're on the opposite side. These are our demands. And move forward. Instead of what's been happening, which has been Donald Trump bowing down to Putin and pretty much saying, okay, that's what you want. Sounds good to me. That is clearly a problem. Now, Lavrov's statement continues here by his office saying, Lavrov and Rubio reaffirmed their readiness to work together to restore a mutually respectful interstate dialogue in line with the tone set by the presidents. Once again, not involving Ukraine. How is this a peace talk? How are these discussions going on? Because as far as we're seeing, it's almost like the United States is working with Russia to decide the fate of Europe and Ukraine, which is clearly a massive problem, especially when you're already demanding Europe so much without giving them anything. I mean, the other day it was the United States saying that we're going to pull back some support for Ukraine. Europe, you need to step up. And, also, can you guys buy your weapons from us? Can you guys buy your energy from us? So what you're asking Europe to do is clean all this up. We're walking away. And could you send us more money? We like money. Could you send us money? Now, as all of this is happening, Zelensky is reminding the world that, yeah, you guys have been sending your support and we greatly appreciate it. But it hasn't been you on the battlefield. It's been Ukrainians. Ukrainians have been protecting you. Because if we have failed, these Russians would have been in your home attacking your family and your friends. And so, as you're looking at these discussions, remember that if it wasn't for us doing what we're doing over here, without any NATO troops, American troops, European troops, you guys would have been next. And if we do fall, you are next. We're seeing what's going on in Belarus as Russia is building up these troops and all these other things. They're not preparing for negotiations. They're preparing for war. And right now, NATO and the United States are not prepared. They're not ready to have to face off against Russia, in which if we don't figure out what's going on here and put Russia in its place by threats and security guarantees and everything else needed, then Russia will try it again. And they'll do it alongside North Korea, Iran, and essentially China. And clearly, those are our big issues. One final thought. We saw J.D. Vance give a speech yesterday at the same exact conference, and it was received very poorly. Because he said that essentially the issues going on in the world has nothing to really truly do with China or Russia, but it's Europe itself. And try to make it seem like all of the leaders inside of Europe are running as dictatorships in a way versus as democratically elected leaders. And I have to tell you, I've never seen European leaders so angry at the United States. As an American, that was embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing to see our vice president, who is supposed to be strong. We're with you, Europe. We'll help you out. We'll figure things out. You could have said the most generic things, but instead he went into a rant about how Europe is the problem with Europe. These conferences are supposed to bring us all together and talk about the common goals. Instead, the United States said, Europe, you're the problem, not Russia, not China. You're the problem. And I still can't believe it. And I have to apologize to all of my European viewers. That is not how us Americans feel. Look, you obviously have two different kinds of Americans going on right now, that we're one nation. Some Americans do feel that we're doing too much in Europe without getting return. Others feel that we're not doing enough. But I will tell you this. We all know that Russia's in the wrong here. And we're not blaming Europe that Russia invaded. We're kind of angry that Russia invaded and that they didn't take any of the U.S. threats seriously because they didn't feel there was a threat. We're angry because we should have done something more to stop this from happening, from stopping Russia from happening. Those agreements we signed as Americans to keep Ukraine safe failed. We failed Ukraine. That's what it comes down to. And because we were so delayed on getting stuff to Ukraine under Biden, because we didn't trust Ukraine long enough, we now have a larger mess that we have to figure out. Because if we don't, Europeans will be in trouble. And Donald Trump just sees it as Europe as its own. That's why he said Europe is an oceans away, but that's not how Americans feel. We all have roots from Europe. I'm a third generation Italian. My wife is from Ukraine. I've got friends who are second generations, first generations. We're a country of Europeans that came here to start a new life. We agree that we should be helping Europe as fast as possible so that, whether it be our favorite country there or our friends or our family or whatever, are safe. Do not take what people like J.D. Vance is saying as that's how every American feels, because it's not. It is not. We want to help Europe. We want to help Ukraine. We want to stop Russia so they not only don't do this to Ukraine, but they don't do it to any other country. Now, how can this happen? We don't know. The one thing I can say is we have to be together as a world and understand that Russia is the problem, and we need to be the bigger group here to come together and say, Ukraine, we got this. Russia, stop what you're doing, or we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And it's sad that's not what has happened. It's sad that the United States, who's supposed to be the leader in everything, is not doing that. I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on everything happening around the world, especially in Ukraine. So please do me a big favor. Make sure you are subscribed as we're trying to build this channel, as we're trying to get to 100,000. And I'll be sure to always bring you guys the most verified news on what's going on around the world. That's my promise to you. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with TikTok. It could be going away in April. So this is where my main content's going to be. I appreciate everyone's support. Please stay safe, and I'll see you later.